Let's go ahead and exist. Let's have at it. Well, before we can exist, I need my chalk. Because life would not be the same without my chalk holder. Does anybody have any other teachers who use this? One of these?
No, you only.
Okay, so if you ever see this lying around, it's mine. Because I use this all the time. And I'm surprised that more people don't use these. Are great.
Is it like your own?
It's just a chalk holder. I bought it, yeah. But it's like you're breaking chalk all the time otherwise if you don't have a chalk holder. And this is also less wasteful because I can use even a tiny piece of chalk. And it's just ridiculous to try and write with a tiny piece of chalk. So I'm a big fan of chalk holders. And this is my chalk holder. So we left off Tuesday, talking about what has brought society to this point. Obviously, in the context of when this book was written. 58, I think I looked it up, 1958. Of course, in the Cold War fervor there, the great fear, understandably so, that existed, that, who knows, perhaps overnight the world will basically stop existing. I can't help but share the quote that I already read last class at the very beginning of this book. The story is told by Kierkegaard of the absent-minded man, so abstracted from his own life that he hardly knows he exists until one fine morning he wakes up to find himself dead. Which is obviously paradoxical, it's intended to be. But the point is, we go about life and society as drones, not even pondering for a moment what this existence we happen to have is, because we get so caught up in all of these hair-splitting mysteries involved in essence, which is a secondary question after existence. In fact, let me put that on the board again as a reminder for what, most generally speaking, existentialism even means. Existence precedes essence. In other words, that you are superior to what you are. All right. They're both very important questions, of course, but existentialists try to bring attention back to the first part. So, I'm sorry, I forgot one more little procedural detail I wanted to do before we start existing here. Quick reminder of our next quiz, which will be next Tuesday. Read pages 73 to 79, I think. It's on the Google Doc, always go by that, even if I accidentally write an error on the board here. If you don't have the book yet, don't worry, I put this particular reading on the Google Doc. And I can never remember if the U comes first or the E comes first on Tuesday. Did I spell it right? You guys can't remember, you guys can all remember. Yeah.
I know that was just
Discussion sheet. There you go. No problem. Anyone else need a discussion sheet? A couple people came in after I hear it.
Wait, for today or for?
This is the same one. I just the attendance sheet's somewhere. And if you ever miss the attendance sheet, don't stress. I always keep it out at the end of class, and I'll always try to remember to announce to remind anyone who hasn't signed it to sign it before they leave. Okay. Now we're done with the administrative stuff. The existential crisis upon this book's publication, that society might wake up tomorrow morning and find itself dead. It's not that a nuclear war would probably not kill everybody instantaneously, but it would overnight change the world forever. Reality would know human societies. Life would no longer be the same for anyone after that. So what other, did you guys have, so we've had a couple ideas already, but have you taken the last couple days, not to morbidly and paranoia, but just to ponder what other existential crises might face society today? So we have the virus. I don't want to get anybody too paranoid about that, but that's always an existential crisis, the threat of a big plague, which maybe now is there suddenly.
You guys got the meteor option.
So you're always worried about meteors hitting us, understandably so. And it's the more we know, the more paranoid we get.
The solar flare.
Solar flare, yeah. Yeah, we talk all about these nuclear blasts possibly wiping out our electric infrastructure. It wouldn't have to be all a nuclear war. Just even if like a terrorist organization got their hands on one nuclear weapon of some sort, they could explode it high in the atmosphere and it wouldn't kill anybody, but what would it do?
Nuclear winter.
Yeah, it could nuclear winter, and even if it wasn't that powerful, it could still.
What about all electronics?
Yeah, because the EMP blast that it would produce would overwhelm our electric infrastructure, wipe it out. It would take probably years to recover from one such event. So there's that. Solar flares would do the same thing, and that's completely not up to us. There's nothing we can do about that. If it wants to happen, it's going to happen. It happened, in fact, in the 1800s. There was a great, huge solar flare, and if it happened today, the same one, it would have wiped out our whole electric infrastructure. Back then, they only had telegraph lines, which were extremely robust compared to our infrastructure today. Even those started sparking all over the place. I think, if I recall correctly from my research, telegraph offices, whatever they call them, caught on fire in some places. So there's that. Society as we know it, in the Western world, the industrialized world, of course, depends upon this incredibly delicate, fragile infrastructure that we just take for granted. It could be gone so easily. What else?
Losing everything you hold dear. So.
Yeah, exactly. And we just take it for granted. Another one?
Do you watch Silicon Valley?
What is that? I mean, I know it's a place, but is it also a show or
it's a
something?
TV show,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Okay, what happens there?
So, the whole premise is that they make a free public internet
Uh-huh.
that doesn't require. I don't know. I don't get the technology of it. Not
What
good
is
at that sort of thing.
satellites doing on
So basically,
something?
the effect of that is the end of privacy because
Mhm.
the AI learns to
Yeah.
break all
Yeah.
these encryptions really quickly.
We're almost there, you know?
But we're
So like Terminator.
yeah.
Terminator,
In reality, we're very close to that actually being the case.
Yeah,
or
you
at
know,
least being possible.
Even third world nations, it's starting to, the wireless devices are starting to more and more get in the hands of not everybody yet, but it seems to be moving in that direction. Once every place on Earth has internet access, what's to stop one person or organization from having control of everyone immediately? They're trying to get it throughout the world now with either blimps or 5G or Wi-Fi plans. It's weird. Google has this big project on it. Satellites also, that could certainly do it. What else is giving us an existential crisis today?
Australia's on fire.
Australia's on fire.
That's a big thing.
Fires, what strikes more fear into our hearts than fire? Understandably so. And it's such a basic, primal thing that we've always had to deal with, and yet with all that technology, we seem to be still quite susceptible.
Well,
Yes.
that was anarchists who did that one. There was 150 people involved.
Was that one
That was a whole
organized movement that did
Yeah.
that?
Mhm.
Wow. But that must have been. Was that it? I mean, they didn't have other causes as well? It was just the anarchists
as
that
far
did
as
that?
I know, that's how it began. I don't know how it
Wow.
exploded and what it became, but it started with 150 people.
The thing is, you get even a tiny group of people dead set on destruction, and there's so much that they can do if they have some intelligence, which is really scary to think of. If we close that door, and if we said, all right, everybody, electronics off, and if we just sat here and plotted out how to destroy society, we'd probably do it.
Well, they're probably trying to change it, not destroy it. They would
Yeah.
destroy themselves in the process.
Yeah,
They're just trying to
certainly.
change it to what they think that it needs to be.
And by the way, we're not going to do that, so don't quote me. Please don't ever quote me on
Stay
that.
class.
The point is, it's so important that people understand, that people desire the good, because it doesn't take many twisted people to really ruin things. So we got to try and make sure people aren't twisted. Moral of the story there.
Responsible.
Exactly. I don't want to drag this on to the point of it becoming depressing, but I also don't want to cut anybody off if you have any other thoughts.
I mean, there's also conventions about computer security, and in them they have all different contests to see, just to show and demonstrate how basically everything's insecure and compromised. Where
Wow.
they'll break into ATMs with USB sticks,
Wow.
voting machines. They can basically break into anything, but the only reason that nobody does it is because the amount of people that understand the technology is so few, and if you understand that technology, you can make so much more money working for a private company than most
There you
people.
go.
But then you're hot.
So thankfully, it's still in one's best interest to not do that, but wait until it's not in one's best interest.
I mean, the
Use
information's
that.
out there if you really want to learn how to, take
The
down power
precarious,
grids.
yeah, the lack of we all live so much of our lives digitally now, and yet that is so very insecure, so precarious, so susceptible. Yeah. I mean, we've all probably had almost all of our information stolen by now. Can you think about how many data breaches there have been in the last few years alone?
My father does it.
He hasn't had his
He's
data
a doctor,
stolen.
but he pays other people to like, stop people.
Uh-huh,
Just by their
so,
phone number. Actually, it's really easy.
huh,
It's called metadata.
metadata.
Metadata, yeah.
Metadata.
And
Alright.
basically where they've been, what they've done, what the purchases they made, the calls, the texts, it's all this data.
Wow.
Yeah. It's all connected actually.
So it's all out there up for grabs with whoever wants it.
It's actually really easy. You just have to have money. That's
Mm.
really it. Or if you know how to do it yourself,
Hmm.
independently. Yeah.
Wow. So be afraid, be very afraid, everybody.
Don't piss off the wrong person. I'm
Yeah,
serious.
there you
I'm
go,
very
there you
serious.
go.
Don't piss off the wrong person.
Yeah.
Some of these
yeah.
people will screw your life up.
Mhm.
Seriously.
Mhm.
Just I know they're responsible.
Another thought?
Yeah, a lot of personal information like is so easily accessible, like through dark internet.
You can just get it up directly on there.
You can get a social security number
Mm.
from anybody you want for around $14.
$14.
Yep.
Wow. Not even $14.99.
No tax.
So is
So
are we all quite morbidly depressed right now? Just more stuff.
I
Yes.
have one more that's like slightly uplifting.
Okay.
Because,
Excellent.
because of like technological advances in like police, you can't just kill people as easily. Like in the 70s, like there was just serial killers.
It's easy.
everywhere.
Okay, we have better
Just all the
forensics
time.
now. Okay, there's some good
So
news.
that was
Yeah.
like a crisis,
Uh-huh.
but not as
Uh-huh.
much anymore.
Yeah, DNA testing has certainly helped us solve more crimes and hopefully inspired fewer people to commit them in the first place, although maybe it hasn't as much as we would have hoped.
Honestly, criminals
Amazing how
they're just going to become smarter. They're just going
They
to adapt to our
become
society and
smarter,
in our safety
yeah.
measures. That's really it. They're just going to adapt.
You just gotta always hope that the good people, that there's more smart good people than smart bad people. Hopefully.
More
Another
efficient.
one.
Well, now we're getting a gray area when it comes to like solving crime, where it's they can plot out where people are going to start plotting for crimes. Like they find people
You can
online,
see that
like, you can
searches
see where their
every day,
search is.
yeah.
what they're doing. So then the question starts becoming: do you stop them before they even start, or do you let it happen and then stop?
That's definitely a moral philosophy question right there.
Or you just take the reason from their hands and give them a necessary one.
Well, and
Do
I
something
think
else.
with technology advancing, there's also, it can be easier for people to find people. Like, have you heard about the new app that you can take a picture of someone on the street and it'll immediately find all the information about them?
Whoa.
Yeah.
What's that at?
I can't remember, but it's like.
So it's all facial recognition in the hands of
Yeah.
everyone now.
So they can take a picture and
Yeah,
put someone
show
on the
all
street.
social media.
And they
So
can
you-
find
does anyone know the name of this app?
Yeah.
I've heard of
Let's
that.
just do it now. Let's do it
Yeah.
You know what?
No.
Go for it. Wait, another thought.
When I was traveling the last time, they didn't even need my passport or anything. It's just your face. It recognizes you. Like the government just they
I don't
didn't
like
even need my
that.
passport.
Wow.
So
And
the
I was in
tech is there.
Honduras.
They didn't require you to even present it?
No,
So
You
someone
were
apparently
traveling
found
international?
that.
it just
Because they already had you
lit up
like in
green.
there.
Passport.
Yeah.
Huh.
I don't like it.
US?
Clearview AI.
Clearview AI.
They said
Everybody download
it.
Now I want to see it works.
Take a picture of me. Take a picture of me, please. Please.
Another thought.
Just that gave me that like society's over feeling in my gut, which reminded me. I was reading about this thing the other day. This is the most horrible thing I've ever heard of in my life. But Russia is making a new game show that's gonna take place in where? Siberia, yeah. Where just there's no rules.
Yeah, who wants rules?
They specifically outlined in the pitch for the show
That's
that
the
like
only rule?
murder is legal.
Ratings.
Ratings.
Sounds like, what is that? See, what is that book? Sounds like Hunger Games or something.
There's the Chinese Sesame credit system.
Yeah,
where you're
that's
penalized.
downright.
Yeah. heard about that.
Apocalyptic. I mean, to think that everything you do is being measured by the government, and then they can decide how worthy of a person you are based on a simple number. Another thought.
The company is called Clearview.
Clearview. Oh yeah, he's Daniel founded Clearview AI.
641 million pictures of U.S. citizens, and it's being implemented with all the police officers in the country right now.
Okay. Wow. Another one.
Wait, so there, like in this day and age, there's literally no way to like go off the grid. Like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like, I feel
Yeah,
like
I mean, we all have bodies, and if they can just identify us by our physical presence, there's not much you can do. So, but that I'm glad you bring that up, because here's the thing. The moral of the story here is not become obsessed with safety and security. Like existentialism says the opposite. It says you're doomed anyway. You're gonna die. And these existential crises are actually good. Why? Because they help us what? Adapt, sure. Did he say live better? Is that what I heard?
No, it says prepare.
Oh, prepare, okay.
Fine reason.
We should certainly be prudent and have some preparation for things, certainly. But even more importantly, what did I just hear?
Fine reason.
Find reason, certainly.
Focus on what's really important.
Yeah, focus on what's really important. You know, when the better things are going, the more you can say what to yourself.
What really matters.
The better things are going, the more people can pretend that they'll always be that way. The more you can pretend that you can find your meaning in these trivial little pleasures and comforts and securities that might satisfy for a moment or two, but not much longer. And when we have these existential crises confront us, we have no choice but to cast that false sense of security aside and try and live a more authentic life. That might be the single word that comes up most in these writings. Authenticity. What would be the opposite of authenticity?
Disingenuous?
Disingenuous, yeah. That would be one way of putting it. What other antonyms can we come up with here? So we're trying to be authentic, which means we must not be disingenuous. We must not be. Another word I'm really
Dishonest.
Dishonest, absolutely. Must not be that.
Fraudulent.
Fraudulent, certainly. And the other one is duplicitous. Duplicitous, what's duplicity? So the prefix here, two. You have two
The same.
beards. No, two faces. You have two faces when you suffer from duplicity. So, look, as I say, we all have to wear multiple hats because we all have different things we got to do with our lives. Wear as many hats as you have to, but only have one face. Don't be two-faced.
Or hair.
Different hairdos. You can comb your hair differently if you have to in different situations, but only have one face. And you know exactly what you mean when you call someone two-faced, don't you? You thought they were one person. You thought they had certain convictions and principles and motives, and then you realize that they actually have completely contradictory ones when they happen to be with other people. And that's no way to live. So, but with philosophy, authenticity demands that we ask the important questions, that we live in accordance with what we discover. So that one word is going to come up all the time as we continue through these readings, authenticity. Shall we move on from our considering, I mean, this will come up a number of times, I'm sure, throughout the semester, but shall we just leave that in the past there? Does anyone really want to throw any other existential crises out?
Instead of fire, what about like ice, like cold?
Cold, yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't know.
Who knows what's going on with the climate, one extreme or the other.
Basically any natural disaster.
They seem to be getting worse and worse. So
I
that's.
think we need a plague.
We need a plague.
Like I'll be like sitting in traffic, dude.
We got Thanos over here saying kill half the population.
If you think we're ever overpopulated, just drive 10 minutes away from the city and all you'll see are cornfields.
Yeah.
We tend to congregate a little too much, but I wouldn't say there's too many things. In fact, there's a lot of people are sounding the alarm now because there's too few people. You know, for society to actually function, you need pretty steady birth rates. Does anyone know what's happened to those recently? They're almost gone. Like, it's insane how few children are being born these days.
Wait, what? Really?
Yeah.
Is that based
In
on
Western
Is
nations.
that based on fertility rate? Or
Yeah. Dude, that's like we're not replacing ourselves.
Oh, wow.
We're not even replacing, much less growing.
Well, that's the thing, a lot of people
That's what's called
nowadays are
Handmaid's
realizing
Tale.
that you don't need to have kids just because everyone else is having kids. So
Exactly.
it's
People want one kid.
And talking about all these possible world-ending things, people are saying it's unethical to bring kids into this world at this point.
Oh.
Yeah, kids cost money.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not cheap to raise.
Only have a kid if you need a legacy. It's pretty simple.
There's a pretty direct correlation with people not having kids and people going to college for longer amounts of time.
Yep.
So
Oh, yeah.
there's probably a decent correlation with just people.
Yeah, the more
being in
educated
debt
we get,
until
the
they're
less we,
until they
Until
can't
they go to
afford to
college.
have a kid.
yeah, you're done having your various degrees once you've lost the ability to have kids. There you go. Anyway, as one going after his PhD who's got his fourth kid in the way, I heartily encourage having children for anyone who feels called to that. Not for everyone, but speaking of which, check your email before you come to class come March. Because if you get an email saying my wife's in labor, I'm not going to be here.
Congratulations.
Yeah, number 4. All right, so all sorts of reasons to consider more deeply the very questions that comfort, luxury, pleasure, security, and safety all make us avoid. All right. Let's see what the book says about that. And I didn't have you guys read this, so most of you probably haven't seen these next few quotes. I'll take a look at. I'll get to the next question and discussion sheet in a moment here, but let's see what wisdom the author of this book has to share with us. There is, by this time, again, he's writing this in the 50s, widespread anxiety and even panic over the dangers of the atomic age. But the public's soul-searching and stock-taking rarely, if ever, goes to the heart of the matter. We do not ask ourselves what the ultimate ideas behind our civilization are that have brought us into this danger. We do not search for the human face behind the bewildering array of instruments that man has forged. In a word, we do not dare to be philosophical. Uneasy as we are over the atomic age and the crucial question of existence itself, we choose to remain as absent-minded as the man in Kierkegaard's story. One reason we do so lies in a curiously remote position to which modern society has relegated philosophy, and which philosophers themselves have been content to accept. All right, so there's the backdrop for one of the primary complaints, if you will, of existentialism. Philosophy, in the modern era, has morphed into this just other version of empirical science. It's just become a conversation only entered into among certain highly educated people in certain very specific fields. And the way that philosophy too often is undertaken today is as if it were just another empirical science with all sorts of symbols and formulas and crazy language that no one understands and hair splitting about questions that no one cares about. And I can say that from experience, being in a PhD program right now. That is usually, to this day, what philosophy has become, sadly. But that's not what it is. What the existentialists will say. It's not what it is. And if we really want to know what it is, we should take a look at its foundational periods, which happen to be in ancient Greece. Let's see, I'm going to skip a bunch here for the sake of time, but he does bring up a point worth acknowledging here. So a French word, and I think I bring this up in my intro flow classes as well, called the déformation professionnelle, the professional deformation. Put in a common expression. If all you have is a hammer, every problem
Is a nail.
Yeah, every problem is a nail. So, the professional deformation, what might that mean? This is, not all professionals are doomed to have this, but it is a temptation, certainly. You become a professional in something, and you start approaching reality and life itself merely from within the little perspective of your own professional occupation. And, I imagine it must be pretty difficult to be married to, no offense, but a psychologist. Because you're always wondering if what? I'm not at all discouraging psychology. I'm just saying, be careful that you don't go psychoanalyzing your spouse, for example. They're not going to take too kindly to that. why is he bringing this up here? Well, that has happened in a strange way to philosophy, which is by its nature supposed to be such that that doesn't happen to it. It's supposed to be such that it doesn't pigeonhole you. You're supposed to be asking the deepest questions that matter most. And yet, this professional deformation has had a very unfortunate effect on modern philosophy. Let's take a look at what else he says about that. The profession of philosophy did not have the narrow and specialized meaning it now has in its formational periods. In ancient Greece, it had the very opposite. Instead of a specialized theoretical discipline, philosophy there was what again, we said it in the first class, a way of life. A way of life. That's what it was. It was a way of life. It wasn't a specialized area of study full of words that no one understands and a discussion that only a few elite people can enter into.
So you're just saying there's a group of people who got cocky with philosophy?
Well, there was I think he predicts it right. Here's what he says.
Yeah.
Actually, he'll get to it, so hold that thought. He'll get to his theory on this in a moment. It was a concrete way of life, a total vision of man and the cosmos, us and nature, in light of which the individual's whole life was to be lived. Your life is to be lived in accordance with the discoveries you come to. Even in Plato, where thought has already become more differentiated and specialized, and where the main lines of philosophy as a theoretical discipline are being laid down. Nevertheless, the motive, in other words, the inspiration of philosophy, was very different than the cool pursuit of the savant, engaged in research. The cool, meaning the detached, indifferent. Oh, I don't really care what I discover. It doesn't really change anything whatever I discover. It's the savant, the professional, the person really who's excelled in one specific area of study. He's contrasting Plato's philosophy in ancient Greece to that idea of a modern researcher. Philosophy for Plato was a passionate way of life, and the imperishable example of Socrates, who lived and died for the philosophic life, was the guiding line of Plato's career for 5 decades after his master's death. His master, that is Socrates, was a teacher of Plato. It was life and death. It was, as he says next, the soul's search for salvation. Don't expect to get too far in a graduate PhD program if you present yourself today as wanting philosophy for that reason. Because today, and this is what existentialism rebels against, philosophy has become, here's his theory, that's what I was getting, whoops. Gotta switch notes here. I have the rest of my notes on this unit, on this. All right, here it is. The ancient claims of philosophy are somewhat embarrassing to the contemporary philosopher, modern that is, who has to justify his existence within the sober community of professional savants and scientists. The philosopher today is pressed, and simply by reason of his objective social role in the community, into an imitation of the scientist. Preoccupation with technique among the modern philosophers, logical and linguistic analysis, syntax, semantics. In general, the refining away of all content for the sake of formal subtlety. In other words, you say something that actually matters, and maybe even is bold, and perhaps life-changing, and that's almost embarrassing in a modern, cool academic philosophical context, because it's supposed to be just as detached and indifferent as any empirical science. So his theory is this. Philosophy has transformed itself in the modern era into a pathetic imitation of empirical science, which it is not and can never be. Empirical science is very important, but philosophy is something different. But that's not what many modern philosophers want. They want to be considered as just like empirical scientists. Why might one want to be considered in the academic world today as just like an empirical scientist? And I'll just say the word scientist now, but know that I mean empirical.
Because there's so much emphasis put on like STEM nowadays.
Exactly.
Science and technology.
Exactly. They get all the
more seriously.
yeah.
They get all the credit.
They get all the credit and they get all the money. Over 99% of federal funding for higher education research goes to STEM. So, and I know that research costs more to do. I'm not saying philosophy should get half or anything, but still, over 99%, come on. So anyway, chasing money, wanting a bigger bite of the monetary pie, certainly lures many into pretending that they're just like those other people who are giving all the money. And admittedly, it's not just money. Modern society tends to look to science and technology for the answer to everything. They think it's going to save us if we just give it enough money, if we just throw enough money at it. And I'm a big fan of research, don't get me wrong. Remember, I am an engineer. I love it. But let's not suppose that it's going to save us. Let's not pretend it's going to solve all our problems, because our problems are much deeper, and therefore the solutions also must be much deeper. And even if we don't succeed, we have to try after them on the deepest level we can. And that's what philosophy is striving after, or that's what it should strive after. But it's what has been forgotten, the existentialists say. All right, so what can we have down here? How is philosophy starkly different in its foundational periods? Ancient Greece, that is, and it now stands, and has long stood, probably since the dawn of the modern era. This trend started with Descartes in the 1600s. But anyway, not an academic exercise. Not a mere academic exercise. Sure, it always had academic themes. You can't make a difficult concept not difficult, but it's not what it merely was. Not a mere academic exercise, it mandated a change of life.
Are you saying that it wasn't an academic exercise?
In the beginning, right.
And now it is?
And now it is,
Okay.
yeah. So I should be clear with that. What I'm giving you now is how it was in the beginning of the era of philosophy, mandated a change in life. As the author says, quote, the soul's search for salvation. Meaning just deliverance in the deepest way from whatever.
Is salvation the answers or the feeling?
Salvation would be deliverance from whatever it is that chains us. So part of the search for salvation, the soul's search for salvation, is also to properly identify what exactly it is that chains us. For Plato, that would be a darkened intellect, error, but the primary thing to be delivered from will itself be identified differently from philosopher to philosopher. But salvation, that's not necessarily meant in the religious sense, just in the general sense of being saved from something. Whatever it is that is oppressing us. And this is certainly not a political sense of oppression, but interior.
It has to be reason.
Reason, certainly. That's going to be necessary. Well,
We obviously
unless you're Nietzsche, I suppose we'll get that. But whatever is interiorly oppressing us, because the societal circumstances change radically from one day to the next, one country to the next.
Always new problems, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but interiorly, something is oppressing human nature universally. We got to be delivered from that, whatever it happens to be.
Alright, so you said they put philosophy into the category with empirical sciences.
That would be the modern trend, yeah.
So, what is the difference between like how they solve problems? Because empirical science has like its right. Is it that empirical science has a
Sorry.
sorry. You got it. So, alright, anyway. Yeah.
I didn't want to make you feel bad. I don't want to close it. I love that guy. I love that.
He's a cool
He's
guy.
very nice.
So is it that empirical sciences has like laws and philosophy doesn't, or what is the big difference now?
The big difference would be empirical science is primarily the scientific method just developed in the modern era of hypothesis, test, eliminate, refine, theory, make a theory, test it, do another experiment. It's basically predict, observe, modify, predict, observe, modify, predict, observe, modify through experimentation. And that is very powerful. As I said, I'm a big fan of that. It can do a lot for us. But it's not going to tell you the meaning of your life. It's not going to answer the deepest questions for you. You're not going to be able to look into a telescope or a microscope and find the answer to these questions, no matter how good your microscope.
Damn it.
Yeah, and we can find a lot of helpful things, even for philosophy, in the scientific method. The point is, it just can't answer the question for us.
Okay, so because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, he was saying philosophy is a form of science. And now I'm going to say wrong.
Well, it is a form of
It is a
science in the
form of
most
science?
general.
No, it's
All
not.
right.
I just said it's not.
This is no, I know. I keep. All right. The most broad sense of the word science. For the past 10 minutes, when I've said science, I've meant empirical science. But that's what I
You
just
mean like
described to you.
chemistry and like all
Chemistry,
all that
biology,
stuff.
yeah, physics. But the broadest sense of the word science just means a reasoned discourse. In which case, philosophy is certainly that. Yes.
But I think I'm right because it's not empirical science. I'll
He
just say-
probably,
I'm
yeah,
just-
he
I'm
probably
saying-
means empirical science. Now, that might mean that he is a jerk. No, not jerk. Logical positivist. So that's what we'll get to in a moment. But I suppose I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Is there anything else I want to have you down? I want you to head down for this. Deliverance from blank. Different things are going to go in that blank for different philosophers.
It's for.
This is still the this is still the second question down. How is it starkly different? It was always seeking deliverance. It was not this merely cool, dry, detached intellectual exercise. It was seeking deliverance from. You don't put anything in that blank. Point is, it's deliverance from something interior. What do we want to be delivered from? Before, of course, we can have the right treatment, we need the right diagnosis.
Yes.
So philosophy tries to do both.
Wait, are we gonna put something in that blank or not at all?
Oh, throughout the semester, we'll have all sorts of different things going in that blank.
What about
For Plato, it's from error, ignorance.
I was gonna say, okay, never mind.
And that's certainly,
Okay.
but whether ignorance is the primary thing to be delivered from or not, that will be different from
You said it was
philosophy.
evil, I was gonna say.
Evil would be the more even broad, yeah. So is ignorance the greatest evil, or is there another evil that's greater? Socrates, Plato say no, all evil boils down to ignorance. Other philosophers say no, there's much more to that which oppresses us than mere
Is
ignorance.
evil always changing? That's a great question.
I said, oh, well, I'll have to figure that out as well, I suppose.
Is good always changing? That's a good question too. They both always change.
There you go. Those are the questions to ask. Those are the questions we can't find the answers to in a microscope. So case in point, perfect. All right, where are we here?
I was really gonna say.
Oh, yeah, I already put this.
I was gonna say ignorance, I really will.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely something we need deliverance from. All right.
I always want to assume my philosophy is bad, if that makes any sense.
Well, I'm sure Socrates would agree that's the way to do it. I always assume from the onset you know nothing, so then you can grow.
I know something, it's probably bad. That's what I always assume. Yeah.
Here we are, logical positivism. All right, so I asked two questions down. Don't worry, I'm not giving you anything for this yet. How existential philosophy is different from idealism and empiricism. Logical positivism is a related concept to those things, which we'll get to in a moment here. This author is saying the movement known as logical positivism in this country, he is writing this book in America, actually trafficked upon, meaning fed on, the guilt that philosophers felt for not being scientists. They see how successful scientists are, and indeed they are, they deserve a lot of credit for that. But then philosophers go about feeling guilty that they're not scientists, so they try to pretend that they are. All right.
Being a philosopher is like being an untold legend.
There you go.
I mean, it's.
For some, a legend in their own mind. for others, a legitimate untold legend.
I'll never be a legend. I don't care less about
It doesn't matter what other people think about it, certainly. Existentialism will insist upon that. Existentialism is not about having others regard you as an existentialist, but being an existentialist. All right. So where did existentialism fit into this development that he's describing here? Well, finally, he says, with the birth of existentialism, well, not with the birth of it. The birth of it was in the 1800s with Kierkegaard, but with the explosion of it into popularity, finally there was a philosophy that ordinary people got, and that resonated with ordinary people. Whereas for so many years, probably hundreds of years, serious philosophical discussions seemed to be restricted to these tiny little circles of academics splitting hairs about questions that common sense already answered perfectly fine. But with existentialism, he says this welcoming. With existentialism, there was a philosophy that was able to cross the frontier from the academy into the world at large. This should have been a welcome sign to professional philosophers, that ordinary mankind still could hunger and thirst after philosophy, if what they were given to bite down on was something that seemed to have a connection with their lives. an existential.
Because that's why I'm here.
Of the many ways you could criticize existentialism, you couldn't criticize it as irrelevant, merely dry, disconnected academic ponderings. It will get dense at times, all philosophy does, but everybody will see the relevance in the various teachings that we will be going over in the upcoming weeks in this book. Even as a philosopher myself, I still have to like pinch myself sometimes and make myself care about half the things that I have to consider working towards my PhD, because so much of it truly doesn't matter. You'll see how everything, or at least just about everything, really matters in existentialism. It doesn't mean each individual existentialist answers the questions well, but they're trying to consider things that directly and concretely matter. What was the real subject matter of the early existentialist philosophers, and how did this focus differ from previous philosophers? All right, let's get a couple pages here to give you some stuff on that. He says, in enlightened, first of all, we've already covered basically classical, meaning ancient philosophy in Greece, but that whole idea of philosophy changed in the modern era, especially with the Enlightenment. And of course, we have plenty of good things from the Enlightenment, but it wasn't all good. In the Enlightenment, philosophy became more of a, let me give you the direct quote here. So this is before existentialist philosophers, enlightenment analytic philosophy. Place an idea on trial to see if it is consistent. There are a few different concepts here, and I'm going to contrast this to existentialist philosophy. Place an idea on trial to see if it is consistent to hopefully aid human progress. That's good. But it can also be a distraction, because here's what existentialist philosophy says.
It's like so selfish.
It can certainly become very detached, that's for sure.
Link to human progress, really?
So hopefully
Well, that'd be selfish in most species.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it. Existentialist philosophy. So here's a very interesting contrast, and this is from the book. I'm quoting the author here. He says, no, with existentialism, we're not placing an idea on trial to see if it's consistent. And I suppose there's a time and place for that. But with existentialism, what do you suppose it is we're placing on trial? To place something on, what do I mean by that, first of all, to place something on trial? Question it, to put it in the docket, and to attack it intellectually. To either strengthen it or discard it if it's wrong, to really consider it carefully, zealously, honestly, is that's what you do when you put something on trial. So with existentialism, he says, you put your life on trial. To see not if it is consistent, that applies to the logical nature of ideas. Rather, you put your life on trial to see if it is authentic. If it's actually lived in accordance with the meaning you've discovered. And it is not for the sake of aiding human progress. As nice as that is, existentialism is very individualistic. It doesn't really matter for the existentialist what's going on with the world, because that's not up to you. But it can change. You can change your own life.
Now we get it.
Very individual. It can be so to a fault, certainly. But it's a welcome reminder, perhaps we can say. Okay. Many of the establishment philosophers dismissed existentialism, he says, as merely a post-war mood. What is that supposed to mean? Merely a post-war mood.
Something that was kind of a fad.
Fad, yeah, like a fad maybe, and inspired by
By those events.
yeah, specifically World War II, the horrendous things we saw that we never dreamt would have even been possible in earlier centuries. It's almost like society had PTSD or something and was being emo. I don't know, but he's saying no. He's saying that's not a valid dismissal of existentialism. It's clearly more than a post-war mood. It is serious. They're onto something, and what that something is would be different from existentialist to existentialist. But at the minimum, we can't just dismiss it as a mere post-war mood. At the minimum, we can say that looking back, can't we? He wrote this book in the late 50s, which was only several years removed from the war, when you still could reasonably argue that maybe existentialism is just a post-war mood. Maybe that's why it's being welcomed. But now that we're decades and decades removed from it, and it's still significant, you can't really say that anymore. It's lasted long enough to count as more than a mood, I'd say. That brings me to a question. I'm curious, and I don't know how big it is. I know it was very big. This author's largely to thank for bringing it to America, actually. But who's heard of existentialism before signing up for this course? Number of people. Okay, maybe half the class about. So that's good. I mean, if I were to mention half the other 90% of the philosophies out there, I'm sure no one's heard of them. So it's pretty good for half you guys who've heard of this already coming into this before you signed up for this course.
Probably thought of the concept, just not what it's actually called.
Right, and admittedly, we've all heard the phrase existential crisis, but that's of course to say existentialism. To have even heard, philosophers have a really hard time breaking into the mainstream discussion because for the very reasons we've just discussed. Most of the stuff they talk about in the graduate departments of universities these days is a bunch of idiotic hair-splitting about questions no one cares about.
Can you give me an example?
I was going to ask for an example.
Oh goodness, if I get
Take your time with it.
If I get too specific, I'll start having to call out individual people over you all, and I don't want to go that far.
I'll call them out. I'll take the heat.
I love my teachers and fellow students, you all, I do. Entire lives and careers have been spent in analytic philosophy today, trying to figure out trying to figure that out.
What do you mean? What's there to figure out?
Not much. We could talk about it for 2 minutes. It'd be a good 2-minute discussion, and I think we'd be about done.
With
I mean, it's cute. It's like an interesting little riddle, right? What's the problem?
If you say it's false, that's true.
Yeah. But then if it's true, it's
false.
Yeah. So clearly this is a paradox. It's just a contradiction. That's the resolution. The square circle contradiction. We go through this in my intro phil classes. Because it's worth dealing with. Don't get me wrong. I'm not rejecting it as irrelevant. We should address paradoxes. We shouldn't spend careers on them. You shouldn't spend decades thinking about this. That's called a waste of a life. And that's exactly what many philosophers, I'm not even exaggerating when I say that there are a number of philosophers today who largely dedicate their lives to this.
We're thinking about it right now.
Right now, yeah. Instead of,
You're like in our coffee showers.
yeah.
Well, maybe they
Yeah.
you have to respect them. They can't accept an easy answer.
Yeah, so
they can't.
there's some virtue involved, don't get me wrong. There's something noble to not stop until you found an intellectually satisfying answer. So yeah. But existentialism still says, dude, cut it out. You gotta confront your existence and stop getting caught up in all these riddles that your analytic philosophy is presenting to you.
Maybe they're just trying to do something they believe they can only do.
Maybe. I should be charitable to them. I should be nice to them.
I hate to be this guy, but
Be that guy, that's all right.
Alright, so existentialism obviously
I'm still trying to figure out what it is, by the way, so
became
it's okay.
well, it grew in popularity. You said in the 50s, 60s, just right around the time like LSD and psychedelics were starting.
It sounds a little like an acid trip,
starting
maybe.
to be like I don't want to be that guy, but like that it was starting to be experimented on by the masses and by the youth in that time, and I think that brings up a lot of life's questions. Like a lot of like.
No, it's true. I mean, I don't know from experience. I never have done drugs. Nor will I ever. But and I don't recommend it. Please don't do it. But admittedly,
I think
that's the only thing. Admittedly, some people just for some reason haven't bothered to think about meaningful questions until they abuse some chemical, which is unfortunate that that's what has to invite them to serious questions. But yeah, it did do it for me. Yeah, that's valid. That's a good point. It's certainly a valid point.
I think it just correlates. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you're right. There is a correlation, certainly. I will not deny that. It makes you step out of the ordinary, I suppose. And again, I'm not talking from experience, but we should hopefully do that because we want to be authentic with life. But sometimes other things force us to do that. So don't go telling anyone that your philosophy professor encouraged using drugs to be existential, because that's the opposite of what I'm encouraging now, actually. I've had students come and like tell me about their LSD trips and say, try to tell me about how philosophical they were. All it does is mislead you away from.
Did you tell them they were wrong?
Politely. Not using those exact words, but here's the thing.
You should repeat that.
No effect is greater than its cause, right? If you want to figure out what the cellular structure of a leaf looks like, what are you going to analyze? A leaf or a really good drawing of a leaf? A leaf. Why? Because even if you put a really good drawing of a leaf under the microscope, what are you going to see? Ink. Ink. Nothing about its cellular structure. You cannot squeeze more out of something than was already there to begin with. Just think about the chocolate bar we looked at last week. We all know that's true. We all know that we can't squeeze more out of something that was already in it. Whatever's going on in your head, whether it's a dream or from a chemical or whatever, what's it from? Your head. Exactly. You can't discover new knowledge by superanalyzing what your own head presented to you. You need to try and analyze reality itself to discover things you didn't already know.
So you're saying that like when you're on LSD, you're not actually coming up with like these new like revolutionary thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, no.
More or less in the air.
And again, I'm not talking from experience, so I can't say if
You're not creative, is what you're trying to say.
You're not really being creative. Yeah, it's kind of all for us.
I'm not talking from experience either, of course, but I'm just saying, hypothetically, like, it could help you realize your place in the universe and, like, what really matters and what really doesn't. That's from what I've heard. And that is thoughts that, like, obviously, not, like, a tablet of acid didn't put that thought
Right,
in my head,
it just...
but it did bring it to light.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It could perhaps, just like, and I'm no psychiatrist, so I've never presumed to be able to make these conclusions, but if a good psychiatrist analyzes something and says, you have a true chemical imbalance, I think that's very much abused today, but if someone really does, and it needs to be on a certain pill, that simply removes a chemical impediment to your mind doing what it already could do. And I think that would be a similar example of that. Yeah, absolutely. Another thought?
Like, I was just gonna say that, like a lot of people on acid, I don't know, they say that when they speak to someone, they can like have a better feel for someone's like authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could you speak on that? Like, why?
Well, I could say
is
that...
that just our own like paranoia and our own thoughts and how we like
No, you're
perceive
deducing
that
the
person
person
on
does.
drugs?
You're simply just deducing.
Do they really have a better idea of others' authentic self? Or do they think they have a better idea of others' authentic self? Perception's probably off, yeah.
I think ultimately, all the drugs are doing to your brain are taking away that voice that's like,
Inhibition.
just that, yeah.
I
besides it makes you like decide not to do a certain thing.
Yeah, it removes something more like.
It's like
yeah,
that
it can't-
debate about people using alcohol as an excuse for something they said or did.
Right.
It's not that you never thought to do it, it's that you did it. Or you wouldn't have otherwise.
What are we doing again? How do we get to this?
I'm sorry, I knew I was set this off. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right. No tangents are fine. As long as they're philosophical tangents. As long as we don't get too deep into like calculus or something.
I still remember the time travel one.
That'll really derail us for.
Let's talk about time.
Oh, no, no.
That I'm sure that'll come up in Heidegger because he was big on time. So we will talk about time come to Heidegger.
You see the past, you need to go faster than light. You have to actually catch up with light and look back.
There you go. But then the whole universe would collapse into a point.
We are currently talking about.
We are time traveling right now.
Or
Or maybe we're not. Maybe there's no such thing as time. So where did I leave off here? Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's all you need down for the next question there. And goodness, we're already past 3 here.
Pretty cool.
I'm gonna skip some quotes here for the sake of time. And okay, ideas are not even. He says ideas are not even the real subject matter of these philosophers, these existentialists. And this in itself was something of a revolution in Western philosophy. Their central subject is the unique experience of the single one, the individual, who chooses to place himself on trial before the gravest question of his civilization. And identifying the gravest question of himself be a task for us. More than thinkers, he's bringing up 2 specific existentialists now. More than mere thinkers, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche were witnesses. Witnesses who suffered for their time what the time itself would not acknowledge as its own secret wound. He's got a lot of really quotable one-liners in here. Anyway, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, he brings them up because they were both kind of messed up. Nietzsche way more so. But Kierkegaard was also a bit messed up. But what he's saying is that these existentialists, they were so authentic with their insistence upon authenticity that they couldn't detach themselves at all from the questions that they were philosophizing about, which were the deepest questions about the very meaning of life and civilization. And it was so deeply true, so deeply important for them that their own lives suffered the very consequences he's saying that society should have for failing to ask the very questions that Kierkegaard and Nietzsche did. For the record, they were both at extreme opposites of existentialism. Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and we'll go over, we have a unit for both of them, so we'll get to them when we get to them. But Kierkegaard, devout Christian, Nietzsche, militant atheist. So, and yet they're both existentialists. Very interesting. All right. He says here briefly that in too many circles, existentialism became identified simply with Sartre's school of existentialism. Sartre is just one existentialist, and this guy says here, probably not exactly the best one either, not the most intellectually profound. He's much newer. I think he flourished especially in the 60s and 70s maybe. Well, no, that couldn't be the case if he's writing about in the 50s. So, but he didn't die until later, and he was pretty significant until his death. But Sartre's definition of existentialism, Sartre was on the atheist side of the picture. It was God is dead, now what, or something like that. It was he called existentialism his brand of it, the question of what to do in a world where God is departed. And that is absolutely not existentialism. That's Sartre's existentialism. Kierkegaard is the radical opposite of that. He's as devout a Christian as they come.
Wait, so he did think God was real.
Well, that's kind of part of the paradox in some of these existentialists.
God is gone.
You can't figure out if they don't believe in God, or if they hate God, or if they think God did exist but was killed. Like, it's weird. It's very weird.
I'm like,
we'll try and wrestle with that when we get to that. But anyway, there are, suffice it to say, wherever you happen to fall in that particular question, you can find an existentialist who sympathizes. All right. I'll try to finish this sheet real quick for you guys. I may not finish it, at least give you something down for the next question before I run out of time here. Give you some rating. Okay. How is existential philosophy especially different from idealism, for example, Descartes, and empiricism, for example, Hume? Okay. Empiricism only takes the scientific method seriously. Logical positivism, as we mentioned, is kind of an extreme form of empiricism. Empiricism only takes the scientific method seriously. Idealism only takes purely abstract ideas seriously. So here's the funny thing. Idealism and empiricism are often contrasted as like the two approaches you can take to philosophy. They're certainly not the two, but sometimes they're presented as such. Existentialism rejects them both.
It doesn't take anything from either of them? Really?
It says these are both idiotic approaches to life, and your approach to philosophy is your approach to life. So stop, first of all, existentialism says stop trying to draw a divide between the two. But also, it says we have to take all human experience seriously. Yeah, it's all game. It's all fair game.
Everything you do is sacred.
Yes.
So in like all other philosophies, they and the empiricism and the idealism would be the two main approaches, whereas in existentialism it's not at all.
It's certainly not at all either of those. I shouldn't go so far as to say you could fit every other philosophy into one or the other. That would be too bold of me. But you could fit many of them into one or the other, at least in the modern era.
I feel like most of them is like it slants.
Yeah, so that's at least you could say that much. Most of them seem to lean one way or the other. And this is just one way of looking at the difference again, as I'll continue to remind you guys, I'm still trying to figure out existentialism. But here's one way of looking at it. Empiricism, as I say here, only takes the scientific methods. But let's talk about idealism for a moment, though. We've already talked about empiricism some minutes ago. This will be my last remark today. Idealism, on the other hand, of Descartes, for example, I'm sure those students have heard this before, but Descartes' famous Meditations, probably his most famous philosophical work. He says, I must doubt everything that the senses give me. I have to just discard it all as useless. I have to which is, of course, most of our existence happens to be from the senses. Why discard it as useless? Because anything from the senses, Descartes says, is what? He says doubtful. And if it's doubtful, it's useless for me, because I'm the absolute certain. For example, he says you put a stick into the water and it appears what? It appears bent. Because you put a stick in the water and it looks like it's bent, you got to reject the senses. That's a bit of a leap there. But anyway, he doesn't give many examples, which a Cartesian would say he didn't need to. He made his point just fine. I would respond, no, he better give better examples than he did, because none of them satisfy me. How do you know the stick isn't bent?
You should look at it before you put it in the water.
Well, how do you know the water didn't just bend the stick?
You can also just feel the stick.
You can feel it,
Yeah.
which is a what?
A sense.
A sense. You're still, no, you cannot escape the senses, no matter how hard you try. Your knowledge is always going to be traceable back to them in some way. Now, the empiricists say your knowledge is stuck exactly at that level and cannot rise above. As you can see, both empiricism and idealism, in their own way, are rejecting a whole sector of the human experience as unworthy of philosophy. Existentialism says, no, existence itself, whatever that happens to come with, is our given. We have to take it all in. We have to simply use that as our given. We cannot have this radical skepticism, doubting everything we can possibly doubt. We're not going to get anywhere with that. Descartes.
I was gonna say embrace and trace.
Embrace and trace. There you go. Embrace it all. Take it all in. Descartes says you can only take one thing in, the cogito. And this will come up later. But does anyone remember what the cogito is? I think, therefore I am. Now, most of you have heard that already, and it's usually quoted today as if it were just advice to think carefully, which would be good advice, but that's not at all what Descartes meant. He meant, I don't even know if I exist. So he's rejecting existence in the first place as uncertain, which is ridiculous. His existence is the absolute certainty. It's the one thing you must take. And of course, everything that secondarily comes with it. But he's rejecting his existence and saying, all I know is I'm thinking. And he has to try and derive his existence from his thought. So he tries to derive metaphysics from epistemology, in other words, which can't be done. And as this textbook says, and I think it says it rightly, it locks man up inside his own ego. It turns you into a self-analyzing, isolated thing that is not even authentically existing, if that's all you do. So it's got some harsh things to say for empiricism and idealism both. But I'm going to stop there for today, because I think I gave you enough. So if anyone needs the attendance sheet, although when we do that, we've got a little video I want to start us off with. So we'll see how much we can get through today. And my hope is, come next Tuesday, we will be ready to move on to the Pascal unit. We're still in kind of we're in the forerunners of existentialism right now, you know. Existentialism, of course, did not begin with Job or Pascal. Those were long before existentialism proper, so these will be short units. Longer units will be on people like Kierkegaard and the existentialists after him. But I don't know for sure how much we'll get through this whole semester. We'll see. I know we'll get to Kierkegaard, I know we'll get to Nietzsche, I'm sure we'll get to Heidegger. But anyway, the encounter with nothingness here. Maybe some of you took a look at some of this in the book, I don't know, but if not, I'll read some excerpts here. The author says, no age has ever been so self-conscious as ours. At any rate, the quality of journalism in the modern age has turned out in the process of its own self-analysis already overflows our archives. And were it not that most of it is doomed to perish, it would be a dull burden to hand to our descendants. These were writing this, remember, in the 50s. A little quite prophetic there, isn't it? He's saying already in the 50s, the journalism of our self-analysis already overflows our archives. And if it were not all doomed to, if most of it were not doomed to perish, not exactly sure what he means by that. But he says if most of it were not doomed to perish, it would be quite a dull burden to hand down to our descendants. You know, you think about it, like whatever we produce now, it's got to be sorted through by those people in the future who have the burden of being historians to try to make coherent sense out of it.
I think what he's trying to say with like doomed to perish is like the fact that there's so much media that like 90% of it's not going to be relevant.
Yeah, that won't even be noticed. Maybe that kind of like it'll still be there, but not. So yeah, maybe he means
we wrote everything down.
But it's
not going to be important.
Yeah, like we very readily write things down without considering whether anyone wants to read it. The same problem is just identified has exploded exponentially, of course, in the digital age, where you see students complaining maybe about like how long Plato's works are or something, or Aristotle. My goodness, your average 13-year-old girl has written more on social media by that time than Plato ever wrote in his whole lifetime. Or 13-year-old girl or boy. No, nothing against 13-year-old girls here. It's everybody. So we're churning out so much stuff, and we're doomed to not be able to understand it. Even what we're making of ourselves today, he's saying, in the future. Anyone here a history major or want to be a history major? Okay, we got at least one. Another. So it's, why is it so hard? Why is that? It's very important, by the way. I'm not a historian, but I recognize the importance of that pursuit. Why is it so hard?
To be a history major?
No, well, why is the field so difficult?
Oh, history field?
Yeah.
There's not a jobs that.
Okay, there's a very pragmatic concern. Yes,
That is one.
I mean more like
A
the
teacher in a museum, dude.
yeah. There's not
About it.
yeah. So the job wise, yeah, but like just the effort itself. Why is it so difficult?
Because there's just so much.
Yeah, there's so much. No single person can read all that
All
stuff.
you can remember is the major events.
Yeah, so they have this incredible task in front of them to stand in front of this mountain of information and try to squeeze from it a general view of what transpired that actually is accurate, tries to hit on the most important things, tries to give a coherent picture. And hopefully they've succeeded, but every summary, of course, neglects something. But anyway, hopefully they succeeded. We'll leave that question aside. What he's saying here is looking forward, we're now making that an impossible task. Because we can't even figure ourselves out now. They're not going to be able to figure out all the stuff we're leaving in the future. And this is just insanely true today with the amount of data we're churning out constantly, not even knowing what the heck we're doing in the process. All right, continuing on here. But the task still goes on, as indeed it must, for the last word has not been spoken. And modern man seems even further from understanding himself than when he first began to question his own identity. Ask, who am I? Of documentation of external facts, we have had enough and to spare. More than squirrel-like scholars will ever be able to piece together into a single whole. Enough to keep busy the popularizers, sprouting in their bright-eyed knowledgeability the rest of their days. This is, you probably detected just in what I've read from so far and what you've read so far, you probably just detected a tone of, let me ask you, how's the tone of this so far different from a textbook you might be acquainted with in your average class?
It's like just narrative stuff. Or
Yeah. It's a little more biting almost, right? A little more caustic than you'd expect from that. But it is considered a textbook, and he's not going to shy away from this. That's kind of part of the point of existentialism, is to be brutally honest with, how pathetic much of modern academic inquiry has become. All right, but I don't want to read the whole thing here. But I make me feel bad. But of the inner facts, what goes on at the center, where the forces of our fate first announce themselves, we are still pretty much in ignorance. And most of the contemporary world is caught up in an unconscious and gigantic conspiracy to run away from these facts. Hence the necessity of returning to a subject that only appears to be well worn. With civilizations, as with individuals, the outer fact is often merely the explosion resulting from accumulated inner tension, the signs of which were plentifully present, though none of the persons concerned chose to heed them. All right. Something that seems well worn. He's referring to returning to something, some pursuit, even if it appears well worn, to try and resolve the very conundrums that we haven't thus far been able to resolve. What well-worn pursuit? Philosophy, about as well-worn as they come, being 2,500 years old. And yet, with a whole new vigor, a whole new approach, a whole new enthusiasm and honesty, even if that honesty appears brutal. Hence, existentialism. Okay, skipping a bunch of pages here so we can get to our present unit. Skipping 10 pages here, actually. He says later, August 1914 shattered the foundations of that human world. He goes to much length explaining the optimism of the optimism that you would expect to see in the intellectual academic world, perhaps even in society at large, before 1914. Okay, well, first of all, what is he talking about, August 1914?
August 1914?
Sure, I'll show I have the facts right in my head.
World War I started.
Yeah, exactly.
World War I, I was trying to think.
Shattered the conception of the world as this nice, stable place, destined to be ever progressing with one year to the next. ever becoming more enlightened and reasonable and good with one year to the next. That month, that year shattered these conceptions. Now, how was it that these conceptions were able to flourish so much in mainstream Western society? What was, and again, I'm no historian, but what era was the world in for about 100 years before World War I? Yeah, kind of the tail end of that, yeah.
Was it the industrial age?
Yeah, certainly. The Industrial Revolution, it kept on seeming to give more and more benefits and advances, and of course, beneath the surface of all these things were all sorts of atrocities. I'm not pretending that's not the case.
Like we just passed the imperialism thing.
Yeah, so that's Pax Britannica. Has anyone ever heard of this?
Yeah.
The British Empire's unprecedented imperial influence, giving apparent stability to much of the world. It's never been an empire that big. And of course, they were committing all sorts of atrocities that we now know more details of. But still, the point, I'm not refuting that. I'm just saying the mood of the dominant intellectual conversation, if you will, of mainstream Western society was so optimistic, so very sure that this progress that was set in motion by the Enlightenment was just going to ever increase and soon enough save us, find maybe the fountain of youth itself, who knows. It was precisely when that optimism reached a fever pitch with all of these new technologies coming at the dawn of the 20th century, Think about the advances in communications, transportation, medicine, that all of a sudden the optimistic foundations of this mindset were shattered. The European man, he says here, came face to face with himself as a stranger. When he ceased to be contained and sheltered within a stable social and political environment, he saw that his rational and enlightened philosophy could no longer console him with the assurance that it satisfactorily answered the question, what is man? It answers all sorts of individual questions, and I'm not saying that's not important. The progress, I'm not saying that there wasn't progress, there was. But he's saying here that this was people suddenly became frightfully aware that it had not given a satisfactory answer to that fundamental question. What the heck are we? What is man? Existential philosophy is thus a product of bourgeois society in a state of dissolution. The individual is thrust out of the sheltered nest that society has provided. He can no longer hide his nakedness by the old disguises. He learns how much of what he has taken for granted was, by its own nature, neither eternal nor necessary, but thoroughly temporal and contingent. He learns that the solitude of the self is an irreducible dimension of human life, no matter how completely that self seemed to be contained in its social milieu. What's that supposed to mean? The irreducible solitude of the self.
What was that last word you actually said?
Milieu, it looks like milieu. But that's actually pronounced milieu. It's just the kind of the atmosphere, the
What type of word is this? French?
probably French. Yeah, looks French.
Milieu.
Milieu, wish I had a good it's kind of like the atmosphere you find yourself in.
Yeah.
And he's saying that social milieu does not actually safely contain us and define us. We are forced to become face to face with what he calls irreducible solitude. The fact that when you stand before the absolute and fundamental and greatest questions, you can't have anyone else do that for you.
You're alone.
You're alone, completely alone. What's that game show where like you've got like a certain number of chances to call a friend or something?
Do you want to be a millionaire?
Do you want to be a millionaire? That's the name of it? Or that's
the one where you answer.
That's one of them.
You answer 20 questions to try and get $1 million.
There's all sorts of stupid games. I don't know. I've never seen any of them, but I understand there's one where you have a certain number of cases where you're allowed to just defer to somebody else's input. What this is saying is that when it comes to what matters most in life, you're radically alone, and that's not meant to be depressing. That's actually meant to be exciting, because you are, our social atmosphere. We are social animals, yes. And I always go over this in my intro Phil classes when I go over Aristotle, but for the sake of time, I don't go over all the details of that. We are social by nature, but actually the later philosophers who I think developed this even better in the Scholastic era, they would say, so some people would say we are accidentally social, meaning our whole social life and state and community and anything in between is just a social contract. It's not in our nature at all. And then there's the idea that we are absolutely our social being and nothing more. Kind of Marxism would go with that route, that you are solely defined by your part in society. Aristotle is not going that far, actually. His position would be something more like here. We are necessarily social animals, but our deepest existence is radically individual. The very deepest dimension of ourselves. And whatever that is, that's what needs to confront these questions. And this is not I don't think that the right way to take this advice would be to reinvent the wheel and just reject whatever everybody else has said throughout thousands of years of glorious tradition we have to consult. The point is, don't defer. Don't pretend that those people can simply answer the questions for you. We learn from them. We don't turn off our brain and just let them do the job for us of answering what is the meaning of life. We can't let anyone else completely answer that for us. All right. He says the most basic things are always learned with pain, since our inertia and complacent love of comfort prevent us from learning them until they are forced upon us. It appears that man is willing to learn about himself only after some disaster, after war, economic crisis, political upheaval have taught him how flimsy is that human world in which he thought himself so securely grounded. The most basic things are always learned with pain. What's the moral of the story for us? Is there one?
Learning is painful.
Learning is painful. Yeah, certainly. So don't
What are you
don't fear.
Go to school.
Don't. I take that as great personal advice. Not to go not to go to unhealthy extremes with this, but to make that a part of your life. Pain.
Yeah, if you're gonna suffer, learn from it.
Don't go cutting yourself or anything. But I'm just saying, we need to regularly be uncomfortable.
Suffer.
It's very important to be regularly uncomfortable.
I was gonna say, something along the lines of complacency is the downfall of success.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to, unless you're a very rare individual, you're going to be inclined to just ignore what really matters the more comfortable you are, because it lends itself to this complacency. So if we just look at how things tend to happen, it's the great tragedies that foist these questions upon us. And yes, more of that is bound to transpire again. But I don't suppose that the way to comprehend this wisdom here, and I think it is wise, is to just sit back and wait for these horrible events to come to force the questions upon us. No. We don't have to learn every lesson the hard way, do we? We can simply strive to live in accordance with this now, before we have some true crisis coming our way. I think that this is kind of an appeal to Stoicism in a sense, not all out, but that if we don't have something in our lives that regularly
Drives us.
I want to make sure I phrase this in such a way that I don't come across as weird and encourage you guys to do bad things.
Take your
But
time.
something painful. You need pain.
Yeah, pain.
You need discomfort. It needs to be regular. Getting out of bed is pretty uncomfortable. Does anyone enjoy getting out of bed in the morning? I sure don't. If you enjoy it, tell me your secret. So life, just ordinary life, presents these opportunities, certainly. But how else? And let's brainstorm this for a moment. Certainly not going to test you on this, but this is a good time to pause. How can we live in such a way that we are not simply becoming centered on comfort and pleasure and becoming therefore complacent. We got an idea.
I mean, having a family would most certainly.
Amen to that. Let me vouch for that person. That you will have plenty of opportunities to exercise selflessness if you choose to have kids. And if you think there's any comfortable way to do that, you're in for a rude awakening. Yes, so I would heartily encourage that to those fellows to it. Anything else? Another thing.
I don't know if this is kind of what you're looking for, but like traveling places.
Yeah, definitely. And don't feel like you need to have a whole group of friends go with you either. Just go somewhere.
Just do it.
You know, just do
Just
it.
do it.
Yeah, just get on a plane.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have to get on a plane. just go somewhere. Don't even buy a ticket. Just just run onto the plane. Some of my most important turning points in my life when I realized I gotta go to this, I gotta do this, I gotta go to this place, I gotta hop in this car and go on this trip or hop in this plane actually.
This must happen.
And it must happen. And I'm not gonna wait and find a friend to go with me because then it's just not gonna happen because they're gonna have some reason they can't do it. And besides, when you do something alone, there's a great benefit to that in that it forces you to what? Adapt, certainly. It forces you to rely on yourself and people that you don't know. You can't just say, okay, friend, let's figure all this out. And, you know, one thing that really worked against this, I'm not saying it's wrong, I use it too, is GPS. How?
Now you just
Steer it and drive.
Yeah, you used to. If you got lost, you had to what? You had to ask someone for help. You don't have to ask anyone for help anymore.
You can still do that. It's a great
Screw
thing.
your GPS. Look, I'm not gonna condemn GPS.
No, I love GPS. I love GPS.
can't navigate my way out.
I would very much struggle without it.
No, last weekend this one dude stopped me in Stewart's. He was like 90, and he said he doesn't have any technology, and he wanted me to direct him to New York City based off of a map that was like giant that he pulled out of his pocket. So I sat there for like half an hour.
Wow.
You just go
Admirable.
Yeah, I was like,
But
you just go down.
But you know what? Even if you don't want to be that 90-year-old dude with no technology, you can at least occasionally do without it. Maybe you can have. Actually, a student of mine a couple years ago said this, and I tried to take this advice. And he said at least, well, he didn't specifically say this, but he pointed out how problematic it is that for most people, the very first thing they do when they wake up
is look at their phone.
look at their phone.
Yeah.
So what I tried to do, that's good. I gotta make sure I don't do that. I just put my phone in airplane mode before I go to bed, so that I'm not even tempted to look at it and see what's going on. If I happen to wake up in the middle of the night, or the first thing in the morning.
For me, it's my
Usually people just
Alarm clock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people just check
Oh
the
no,
time.
your alarm clock will still work on airplane mode. That's the great thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
People
Yeah.
just check the time when they wake up usually.
Check the time. Yeah.
That's usually just what they do.
Just shower.
It's shower eventually. So trying not saying no to technology, that would not be realistic. I mean, maybe you want to do that, and that'd be cool. You can make a movie about it, which would require a lot of technology. But at least semi-regularly having times where we do without the various creature comforts that our technology gives us. Certain times we just turn it off. Travel, certainly, and I'm not saying get rid of the duties of your state and life because you just feel you gotta hop in a plane. Don't do that. But if it's reasonable to do so, and if you feel called to go on some trip, do it, and don't wait for someone else to do it with you. What else? How else can we make sure we're not living in accordance with complacency and comfort? Another thought.
I would try to have a conversation with one stranger every day.
Beautiful. Perfect. Talk to people in the real world, not on a phone, not on social media. Just try to have conversations with people you've never met before. That is a real type of. I mean, it's more painful for some than others. Some people get so used to that, it's like you can't stop them from talking to people. But for most people, they're not naturally inclined to that, and that's a good thing. Yeah, definitely. Try to talk to a new person. I mean, if not each day, at least regularly. But each day, that's commendable. Another one.
Honestly, like being in the practice of having an open mindset.
Open mindset.
And kind of
Views
applying
themselves
it
can be.
to everything like food or conversation.
Okay. Don't have these little.
How you just,
Yeah. Yeah. Be open to things as they come your way. Allow circumstances to have more of a say than you would ordinarily want to let them. We wake up in the morning, we've got our whole days comfortably plotted out in our minds. Try not to be too attached. Still do what you gotta do, yes. Try not to be too attached to all the nitpicky little details that you've got in your mind about how you want things to go. Let circumstances have a say. Certainly, I like that. Anything else? No, what?
Goal setting, like even if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
accomplish your goals, set new ones.
Set new
Just
ones.
Don't
Don't just veg out after you've accomplished one goal. Set a higher one.
Existentialist.
Yeah, try to hold yourself to those goals, even if it's hard.
Give yourself a goal you'll never accomplish.
There you go.
You literally
That'll
have
keep you always
you have to
going.
make the
Yeah.
impossibility
Uh-huh.
possible.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's in the
Set a goal you'll never accomplish, which is
Yeah, you're gonna need that.
I don't know, become like president or something.
That's not impossible,
It's
bro.
not possible.
Ozzy already knows he's going to be the
Dude,
president.
that's not that's my goal.
already
I have a
set.
simple message: make America great.
There you go. Oh man. Well, all right. So I won't torture you guys by making you keep coming up with ideas of how to be in pain. But let's see. I had my own little list here. Have kids is one of them. It's not for everybody,
What?
but if it's for you, it's painful.
So painful.
Especially if you're a
God,
mom.
so painful. Yeah.
Raising them is not easy though. Go on an adventure. Oh yeah, one of the best travel adventures I just hopped on a Greyhound bus. I don't know if they have these anymore though.
No, I've done that.
Back in I did this like a decade ago. I was trying to figure myself out. They had these things called adventure pass or discovery passes or something. Infinite ride for 2 months. Do it every. So I just went all around
That's
the country.
awesome.
So that's a lot.
I don't. That still exists.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's it's a bit pricey, but it's really cheap, effectively, if you use it a lot for those 2 months. Bus stops, they're not exactly like airports. They're among the grimiest places on earth. And you meet
So bad.
yeah, but you meet awesome people at bus stops. So it's just like walk through.
That's a nice line. You meet awesome.
Yeah,
No one's
it
ever
just
talked to me about
yeah,
stuff.
walk through places. But that brings up an important point. Go to places that you wouldn't ordinarily go to, especially if you live in a nice suburb and you commute into worker class and you kind of never see anything else. Go into the lower class places. Go into the ghettos. I spent a lot of time walking through the ghettos, and
There's some really cool street art.
yeah, there's cool street art. There's
Good
cool,
food.
there's people. There's cool people. There's good food.
What ghettos have you been?
Well, I used to live in downtown Albany,
Oh,
so
cool.
I would walk.
There's an amazing
all through
restaurant.
Albany.
Like where downtown?
South Pearl Street.
South Pearl.
Yeah.
I used to live down on the hill, kind of towards Hamilton, on Hampton. So
Hamilton. I'm sure I know it, but
That's
I
the
just
party
can't remember
street.
which one that is.
That's the party street.
It's Party Street on South Lark, but it's when you keep going.
Wait, that's
down,
North
it
Pearl,
goes
right?
by the Capitol.
Oh, okay. So I was, but anyway, there's plenty. Goodness, we're in Troy, New York. There's plenty of places you can, and
Whole city.
yeah, like it's just, and some people live in places like that. That's awesome. If you don't, if you're someone who just never sees that side of society, you should see it, and you should not be afraid of it, because the people who live there are very good people, and they're actually willing to talk more than and they have good wisdom to share. They do.
Everybody has something to say.
Everybody's got something to say.
Peace to the puzzle.
So there's that. Let's, as I said, please don't take this advice to mean like go cut yourself. That's creepy. But like some physical pain, sure. Be careful. Be moderate. I think cold showers are great.
Yes.
Great way.
No.
Yes.
It's very painful, but it's not gonna hurt you.
Wait, what was this?
Cold showers.
It's cold.
Just minor things like that can help you to stop living a life centered
Bro, that
on
just
pleasure
sucks.
and comfort. Yeah, it's miserable. It's utterly miserable.
I feel like
It's just not
I don't know. There's sometimes though where it's like you just did like when I did double sessions for football. Cold showers were the best.
If you're sweating enough, they're actually enjoyable. But so then I guess that defeats the purpose. But ordinarily, they're among the most miserable things you can do. But you will feel so good for like 3 hours after a cold shower. Trust me, if you've never done it, you will.
I tried to
Everybody should try it.
I mean, physical activity could be an all.
Exactly. Good strenuous physical activity. And we all need. Even the doctors will tell us we need that. You need strenuous. You will actually be physically unhealthy if you are never in physical pain due to being in a strenuous situation.
You need pressure.
Yeah, our bodies need that. That's how we actually stay healthy. Is pushing ourselves to the point of some pain. If you worked out to the point where you didn't get at all exhausted or any soreness in your muscles at all the next day, it was probably a pretty lame workout. Like you probably didn't achieve anything. No pain,
No gain.
no pain, no gain. We all know that's true. All right, so sorry, didn't even mean to Didn't mean to stay up for that long on that, but it's good for us to think about. Just don't get weird with it. Don't go. Don't do those other things. Don't just, there's one other thing I have on my list. You could join the military. That would be. That would be. I'm not saying do that. I'm just saying that'll be an invitation to a type of life that will not be comfort and pleasure centered. That's for sure. In fact, I put that down because when I asked this question a few years ago, the first time I was teaching existentialism, one of my students was about to join the military after the semester, and she encouraged and brought that up. So. Did I see any other hands before I move on? No, okay. The men of the Enlightenment, he says, foresaw no end to this triumphant expansion of reason into all areas of social life. But here, too, reason's founded upon its opposites, upon the certain unpredictable realities, war, economic crises, dislocations, political upheavals among the masses. Moreover, man's feeling of homelessness, of alienation, has been intensified in the midst of a bureaucratized, impersonal mass society. I know I didn't give you a discussion sheet yet, but I'm just going to put this word on the board so it's in front of your eyes for alienation. This is a big concept in existentialism. The feeling of alienation, where we have more interconnectedness than ever before. We've got more, especially today with social media and everything and the internet, but even when he was writing this, media was vastly different than it had been with the advent of television and movies and radio, and this is 58, I think, something like that. But it's just gotten even more so today, this concept of alienation, where despite everything superficially seeming today that we should feel more at home than ever, we actually feel like we don't have a home. That modern man feels alienated from himself. He feels like an alien in his own skin and in his own world. Like this deep sense that we don't even belong. Where you go with that, of course, varies from philosopher to philosopher, but that's a common theme in existentialism.
Like I would feel like I wasn't supposed to exist. Something like that, maybe?
Yeah,
what's up?
Why am I even here? What is this thing? What is this society I'm in? I don't even know it. I don't even feel like I'm.
Do I need to be here?
Yeah. What is going on here? Like, who the heck am I? Where am I? Alienation. And this becomes intensified the more bureaucratized society becomes. The more of a big, massive behemoth society becomes, the more each person starts to feel like just a what?
Piece of the whole.
A piece of
the whole.
Yeah. And the phrase that you'll often hear is did you say a cog in the machine? Yeah, like a cog in the wheel you'll often hear. Just another, you think of a big machine and all of its gears, each gear has hundreds of teeth. There's one little tooth in some gear, some little part of the machine somewhere, without much of a relation at all, or even a comprehension at all, of the entirety of the thing. Alienation. If you want to be, the sense of alienation, ironically, seems to increase in proportion to the population of the city one lives in, almost. Which doesn't have to be that way, of course. The primary way to not feel alienated is to have a strong, small community that you're a part of. Most people, of course, find that in family, but also other groups on a slightly larger scale, other communities. Yeah. But the bigger society gets and the more centralized society gets, the less we have that, and therefore the more we have this. That theme will come up later. Polish this out for last page. Okay. In a society that requires of man only that he perform competently, well, his own particular social function, man becomes identified with this function. And the rest of his being is allowed to subsist as best it can, usually dropped below the surface of the consciousness and forgotten. So we are expected simply to perform well whatever particular function we happen to settle into in society, and the rest, they say, we are expected to basically forget about. You hear the question said, what do you want to be when you grow up, to a kid maybe? And what does that question imply? What's presupposed in the very asking of that question?
That he'll be good for something.
Yeah, that certainly. Yeah, there's gonna be. There's a
That's
good
dark.
point. That there's even gonna be a future you can be something in.
That they know.
That they know. That's another sort of presupposition. Yeah, we're all still figuring that out, aren't we?
That they have a say in what
That they have a say. Yes, these are all excellent points. And the other thing that I have in mind is that when that question is asked, it's usually asked with the presupposition that the kid is going to answer with a job, exactly, a career. As if that identifies your essence more than other things. As if what you do is who you are, more so than who you want to be in a deeper sense. So, a much better response, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a scientist, I want to be a lawyer, is the most common things you'll hear. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's kind of sad that becomes that we live in a society where that is expected to be the first type of response to so basic a question. Right? What do you want to do? There are deeper things, much closer to the center of your being than your job, which is quite tangential in most cases. Yeah, what do you really need? What about just like good? I want to be a good person. I want to be a hero. I want to be a heroic person. I want to be a saintly person. Saint.
I need to be myself.
Myself. I want to be happy. Isn't there I was informed there's a John Lennon song about that last year when I brought this up, and I didn't know, but apparently John Lennon beat me to this. He writes, there's some Beatles song about him being asked this, and his response is, I want to be happy, or is this ringing any bells?
It sort of does.
Okay.
It actually does. It sort of does.
So he's on to something there. Because we talk about jobs, we talk about making money, but money can't buy. Well, yeah, but what's the other John Lennon song? Can't buy me love. Money can't buy me love. How true that is. Nothing wrong with deferring to the wisdom of some of our recent lyrics. Okay. Or even just something like vocational as opposed to avocational. I want to be a father, I want to be a mother, I want to be things like this. You don't even hear them. It's like almost not even a thought of when you ask someone what they want to be. But these should be the first thing that comes to mind. And the career is the second thing that comes to mind. He brings up next, and I'm not going to do more reading on this, he brings up next how a key that transformed traditional society into what it is today, to which existentialism, or against which existentialism rebels in some senses, not necessarily categorically. He's not condemning these three things. One of them would be capitalism. One of them would be, I hope I remember this right from the reading, I don't have the page in front of me right now. The other is, I think, just logical positivism or Enlightenment philosophy, but I could be wrong. I should double check.
Right.
I mean, yeah, that would certainly be in line with the theme we're considering here. And the other one, ironically, is Protestantism, he says, which we don't consider much at all today. And I'm not going to make this a comparison, but he does bring it up as one of the three major prongs that kind of transformed medieval society into modern post-Enlightenment society. I suppose, science is what he focuses on specifically as the dominant thing within Enlightenment philosophy, science. So, science, capitalism, and Protestantism. Capitalism in particular, it's some of its primary exponents would be, for example, Adam Smith says that all economic benefit is derived from what? Does anyone know this? And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going by memory from a while ago now.
The appeal of the senses. The appeal of the senses? The appeal of the senses. Like,
It makes sense. I got something else in mind from Adam Smith.
I'm gonna say ourselves.
Yeah.
sweet.
So back in the day, I love being able to say it because I don't have to refer to a specific time. But back in the day, your average guy would be able to do just about everything he had to do. He'd build his house, he'd grow his food, he'd slaughter the cow, he'd milk the cow before slaughtering it. He'd be there really helping out raising the kids. He would do just about everything himself.
Provide for everything.
Yeah. And I'm not saying there was no specialization, there was, but It's nothing compared to what we have today, where everybody does this tiny little slice of the whole picture of what modern man seems to need.
Capable of so much more.
Yeah, so what I'm getting at, and this is what Adam Smith said, one of the real major voices behind capitalism, says all economic benefit is derived from the, what am I getting at in giving that example? Division of labor. That's a tenet of Adam Smith. And there's no doubt that division of labor has been of great benefit. If not everybody needs to do everything, then you can have some people getting really good at a tiny little slice of the overall set of needs. But that's also a main cause of our alienation. And I'm not saying we need to get rid of all division of labor, but maybe we've gone too far, is I think a fair existential critique. Maybe it has alienated us from who we really are, being so small of a slice in our efforts and feeling kind of detached from our actual basic needs that come from this thing, that comes from this store, that comes from this supply chain, that comes from this company, which is owned by this company, which is owned by this company. And you see what I'm getting at here? It's alienation. Heidegger, an existentialist we'll get to much later, rebelled against this very specifically, insisted upon being kind of closer to the earth in a sense, closer. He would spend a lot of his time, and he could have been very rich and just kind of gone to all the expensive restaurants every night and so on and so forth, but he'd spend a lot of his time just in his cabin, like chopping firewood and stuff. He felt that you needed that you really needed that. Having a more integral approach to our lives as human beings.
A whole approach.
Yeah. There's some great quote, it always comes to my mind at this point, but I can't remember it too well.
Find a reason.
Nor who it's from.
Find a reason.
Find a reason. It's something like this though. He says, everyone should be able to, and he gives this long list of crazy things. Fight a bull, raise a child, write a poem, grow food, do all these other things, build a house. And then the last line is, specialization is for insects. It's always stuck with me. Insects are very specialized. We're kind of turning ourselves into that, the more specialized we get. All right, let's move on to the actual, goodness gracious, it's already 2:45. So here's the thing. I wanted to, before we dive into the Hebraism discussion sheet, you found it. A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. I love it. It's kind of ridiculous, but I love it. But I love it. Robert Heinlein. I have no idea who that is.
An invasion.
I know, yeah. Don't plan an invasion, please. But
You should be able to.
But you should be able to.
Yeah, you took that from me. You don't need to.
So now I'm going to have to see who that is.